Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Tanner Steed. Today we're going to be discussing my full palette. We're going to be talking about each and every one of these colors, shortcuts, basic palette, everything is on here. So this is every color that I need for any painting. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited about all the upcoming videos that I'll be creating for you guys, and we've had quite a few new subscribers lately, so I just wanted to thank you, and I look forward to discussing different topics with you in the comments section. Thanks for being here. Today we're going to be talking about every one of the colors on my palette. We're going to start out just left to right. Before I start out, I kind of want to discuss the arrangement in which the colors are laid out. You can kind of notice a gradation. I go from lights to darks from left to right, titanium white being in my upper left, and I also work with all of my generally opaque colors on this left-hand side, and then I have more transparent colors as you go to the right. There are some exceptions to that rule, but generally that's the way I like to lay out my palette. So I have it organized both in value from light to dark and the opacity. So we're gonna start with our lights. So starting here at the top right, we've got the most basic but absolutely essential titanium white. Now, the important thing to note on titanium white is to make sure that it has absolutely no zinc in it. Titanium white is a very strong, long-lasting pigment, next to lead white being the best. If you have zinc in it, in lead white, it'll create more of a transparent effect, but you will certainly run into issues with cracking. So the brand that I use is Williamsburg, which is just PW6. Williamsburg makes an excellent titanium white. I love the consistency of it. Some people have tested which whites and which pigments yellow over time. Typically that's an issue if a painting is hanging in a dark space, not being lit by natural sunlight. If there's too much oil in a pigment, then it will be more likely to yellow, or if there are too many additives, it could yellow. So Williamsburg titanium white has been tested along with many other pigments. It is less likely to yellow than other titanium whites. So next up, after titanium white, we've got Cadmium Lemon. So this is the cooler of my yellows, the coolest yellow that you can get. This is Cadmium Lemon by Windsor & Newton. It's an extraordinarily powerful pigment, generally cadmiums are, and it's important to have a variety of yellows on your full palette due to the different temperatures of each color. So this is a cooler yellow, therefore it'll make nice cool greens. You can get more of a nice north cool light with this. If you were painting, let's say, a lemon, this would be the pigment to use. I wouldn't use this maybe for a warm sunflower in a warm light. There aren't any particular pigments that are only used in single subject matters, but you'll find that when you have a variety of colors and choices, you'll have something that is closer to what you're actually seeing. And that's why it's good to have different temperatures of different colors. So Cadmium Lemon is second. So next up after Cad Lemon, we've got Cad Yellow Pail. Now, technically, cadmiums are more opaque. So as I said, we're starting with the more opaque colors, the lighter colors, and making our way to more transparent and darker colors. Cad Lemon is slightly lighter than Cad Yellow Pail, and it's cooler, so it's closer to my white. Now these colors are opaque in nature, but you can thin them out using linseed oil or Gamsol if you wanted a more transparent yellow. Okay, so what light fastness is the longevity of the pigment and the saturation of the color over the course of many, many, many years. So when exposed to light, will the pigment fade? Every brand has a different rating or scale of light fastness. Some use letters, A, B, C, D. Others use numbers. So depending on the brand, you're going to want to make sure that you are getting light fast pigments, because you don't want your paintings to turn to grays and inaccurate colors over the course of 20 years or even less for some pigments. That's why I stay away from the original Alizarin Crimson. Do not use that. It has to be Alizarin Permanent because Alizarin Crimson is one of the most commonly used not light fast pigments. Hey there, Future Tanner here. We lost the clip for Indian Yellow, so after Cad Yellow Pail, I have Indian Yellow. Indian Yellow is an awesome color. It's a series 2, so it's not a very expensive color. It's transparent, and it really helps in times where you need to darken a yellow. So when you're darkening yellows, you have two options. You can go the green route or you can go the brown route. Now before you enter brown or before you enter green, you can use Indian Yellow to darken it and keep that feel of being yellow still. So often I will use this with sunflowers or in the shadows of different flowers. I may even use it with the pear that I'm painting right here. Not many yellows are transparent, but this one is, and I highly recommend it. So next up is Raw Sienna. This is a darker yellow, and what's cool about this yellow, Raw Sienna and Indian Yellow, is you can darken a yellow and make it so it stays in the more orange range. So when you're darkening a yellow, you have two options. You can make it more brown, or you can make it more green. This keeps, both of these colors are options to darkening your yellows. Raw Sienna, on the other hand, is less saturated than Indian Yellow, but it will still darken a yellow. So both of these pigments are used for that process. So next up on my palette is Cadmium Orange. Cadmium Orange is also light fast, just like all the other colors. It's a really saturated orange, and it's really nice to have on the palette if you're painting things like marigolds or flowers that are really potent and really saturated in intense sunlight. Really nice to have. All right, next up I have Cadmium Scarlet. Cadmium Scarlet leans towards the orange, so it's a warm red. You can also use Cad Red Light or even a Cad Medium in this area if you're following this palette. It's nice to have reds that lean warmer and reds that are cooler. So in this case, this is the warmer of the reds, and it just really expands your range in terms of getting every single color option possible. So Cadmium Scarlet. Hey, so I hope you're learning something through all this. Make sure to subscribe and like this video. I'm gonna make sure to come out with more videos like this where I'm explaining, teaching, educating, creating content that you guys will enjoy. Next up after Cadmium Scarlet, we've got Permanent Alizarin Crimson. Okay, so you have two options for this. You can get Windsor & Newton Permanent Alizarin Crimson, or get Gamblin's Alizarin Permanent. The key here is permanent. It is not Alizarin Crimson. I don't know if Windsor & Newton sells Alizarin Crimson by itself, but Gamblin does. That is not light fast. We've already talked about this. It is not a light fast pigment. So just make sure that you get the permanent versions of either of these. Alizarin Permanent by Gamblin is cooler, whereas Permanent Alizarin Crimson by Windsor & Newton is warmer. Both I consider cool reds, so I will use either or. It doesn't really matter. If it's really important to you, you can have both of them on your palette. Someone who I know had both on their palette was Richard Schmid. He liked using both, and I mean the man was a master of color, and there are differences within the pigments, so pick your favorite or have them both. So next up we have Transparent Red Oxide. This is by Rembrandt, also a lovely transparent color. You have a choice. You can get Transparent Red Oxide, or in place of this, the most common look-alike is Burnt Sienna. They both are transparent reds. They're both dark, and they can be mixed to beautiful, rich darks with them. Now, Burnt Sienna and Transparent Red Oxide are very, very similar. If you had two on the palette or two on your painting, I bet you would have a difficult time deciphering which was which. but according to Alla Prima by Richard Schmid, he preferred Rembrandt, and that's because you can actually get richer darks with your transparent red oxide. And I guess there's a possibility for burnt sienna to crack over time. I will actually use whatever I have on me. It doesn't matter. They're both beautiful colors. I know other artists who are far beyond my skill level, like Daniel Sprick, who uses burnt sienna regularly. So it is not something that is a crucial decision. All right, so we've had Cad Red, Alizarin, burnt sienna, transparent oxide, and now we're moving on to our darkest dark, the darkest color possible, Ivory Black. Some people hate Ivory Black. They say, never put black on your palette, it's the death of all color. I've heard that a million times. I certainly love Ivory Black. I use it all the time. It is so necessary because it is the death of all color. You can kill color with it. Sometimes you need to neutralize a color. So I always have it on the palette. It's a beautiful, rich, cool black. It can be used on the infamous Zorn palette. It'll always be on my palette. It's a very inexpensive pigment, and it's also light fast. All right, next up is French Ultramarine. So we've got Ivory Black here, French Ultramarine. I have French Ultramarine. It doesn't really matter to me if it's French Ultramarine or regular Ultramarine Blue. I'll use them interchangeably. I was just experimenting with the French Ultramarine. It's a slightly warmer version. I haven't really noticed a major impact on my painting because I have other colors to create different effects. I can get a nice cool blue with others, but it's essential for mixing rich, beautiful darks. So I'll use French Ultramarine Blue and burnt sienna or transparent red oxide in its place. And what they do, because they're complementary colors, the orange and blue, they'll cancel each other out and create a really intense, rich dark. So if you were to have more ultramarine, then you could get a cooler dark. But if you had more transparent red oxide or burnt sienna, it would be a warmer dark. And it's nice to have that option. All right, this is where things start to become disorganized on the palette, which I may reorganize them at a later date, but these colors here have kind of been recent additions. This was a more standard palette that I had, so that's why these kind of seem out of place. But next up is Sap Green. I was recently introduced to this color by the artist Daniel Sprick. We were painting outside one day and he assumed I would have a green on my palette and I didn't have one. I was always mixing my own greens with Cad Lemon and Ultramarine Blue for a cool green, or Cad Yellow Pail, Ultramarine Blue, and maybe a little Cad Orange for a warmer green. This is an essential color on his palette and I have recently adopted it. I absolutely love it. It's so beautiful. It's a warm green that is a pre-mixture. It's PY110 and PB15, and it's transparent and it just mixes so beautifully with Ivory Black. I love using those two colors together. Sap Green and transparent red oxide can create a beautiful wash in the background, maybe with flowers or foliage. It's a stunning color, but it's a warm green, and I have cooler greens later on, but I definitely have this on the palette, especially for painting outdoors when there's a lot of variation in the greens in a beautiful landscape. Next up, we've got Turquoise Blue by Rembrandt. This is an extraordinarily potent pigment, and I've just got it on my hands because the tube is cracking. And if you were wondering why I had a diaper on this tube, that's because it cracked, and this is very functional little piece of fabric. So this one's gonna need a little diaper too. Okay, so Turquoise Blue, extremely potent because it contains a phthalo pigment. I'm still getting used to it, to be honest. It can be used in skies. I often will just add a touch of this for early morning sky gradations. It's a beautiful color. It works very well with the next color coming up. They're very complementary. All right, so we had Turquoise Blue by Rembrandt. Next up we have Dioxazine Violet by Windsor and Newton. This is also an extraordinarily potent pigment. I do not recommend the turquoise blue or the violet for beginners. It will overwhelm your palette if you're not ready for it, so take your time with this one. But if you're more advanced and you've kind of you're looking for something new on your palette and you haven't added a violet, this creates an opportunity to make some really intense, rich violets. I could see uses in flowers, and actually don't prefer talking about pigments and even brushes for very specific uses, because really a color can be used in any circumstance. It is just a tool. You don't need all of these colors. You just need that basic palette. And if you haven't watched that video, hit the link above and go check that out. Just for some interesting darks, I've actually seen some artists using Dioxazine Violet and Sap Green, mixing these to create interesting darks in architecture. It's potent, but it's a beautiful color. After Dioxazine Violet, we've got Raw Umber. Now, this color is despised by the same people that hate Ivory Black because it's so neutral. Well, I hate to say it, but I love neutralizing colors. So this is one of those that I like to use. Now, I have two options here. I have Gamblin and Windsor & Newton. They are different. You're gonna find that different brands will have a different mixture. Not only are their viscosities different, but the temperature is actually shifted. Raw Umber by Windsor & Newton, I prefer to use with flesh tones, and that's because it leans towards a warmer side of the color wheel, whereas Raw Umber by Gamblin is kind of more towards green. You know, this could be fine for like stone or casts and stuff like that. If I were to choose between the two of them, which one to have, I would pick Windsor & Newton. I really like the warm feel that it has. We have Raw Umber. After that, we've got Viridian by Rembrandt. Now, I like to think of Sap Green and Viridian as brother and sister. They are related in that they are greens, but one is much warmer and one is much cooler. Now, Viridian, I love to have for foliage. It is just an excellent color, especially for those cools. I even like to use this in the sky, just a little bit of it. You can get some really intense, beautiful colors in the sky that are just leaning towards the green. It is more opaque, whereas Sap Green is transparent. Common use for this is mixing Viridian and Alizarin Permanent to create a really intense dark. You can create darks with complementary colors. So earlier we talked about ultramarine blue and transparent red oxide. Here's another option for you, Viridian and Alizarin. All right, so we've made it all the way down to here. Now we're gonna bounce back up to our titanium white. Now, the reason why I have these colors here, these three at least, is because they contain a lot of titanium white. So I think of them as pre-mixtures with white in them. So they are very opaque, and you need to be aware of the opacity of each pigment because it'll create a completely different effect than putting down a mixture with transparent colors. You're not going to be able to see underneath this color as much because it's so opaque. So next up is Pale Rose Blush. Now, Windsor & Newton just renamed this color to Pale Rose Blush from Skin Tone. What color is a skin tone? There are so many colors in flesh. I guess it is maybe a good foundation for some skin types, but it is not limited to just that use. It can be used elsewhere, like in the pink skies in a landscape behind mountains, or even some rocks and lichens can have this pink in it. That's why it's a bad idea to think of one pigment for one use. It's good to have the variety of colors, but don't just limit yourself to one pigment, one use. All right, next one up is King's Blue Light. And if you watched my unboxing video from a few weeks ago, I discovered on camera that this is actually a color with some issues. I didn't realize that they used zinc white in this mixture. Ideally, it would just be titanium white and ultramarine blue, because that's all it really is. They added zinc white to create more of a transparent effect, so it's less opaque, but you run the risk of cracking with zinc white. So I limit my use of this color, but I love it so much that I do use it. Alright, so after King's Blue we have Naples Yellow by Windsor & Newton. I've misplaced the tube, so we'll just have to put up a picture right here. Naples Yellow, another pre-mixture with a lot of titanium white, that's why it's on this side. I like to use it most commonly when I'm painting the figure. If you need a color to be pulled in the yellow direction or a little bit lighter and a little bit yellow, it's just a good pre-mixture to have. So that's why that's there. Right. Last but not least, we have Terra Rosa. Now, I've heard some artists call this the bully of reds. It's so intense that it can overpower many other mixtures. So just like Dioxazine Violet and the Turquoise Blue, because these are intense pigments, you just need to be aware of their intensity and only add a little bit. And that's why it's good to very slowly add these colors to your palette. So have a basic palette, try one color out and see how it affects your paintings. And then if you need to, you can try another one. But this should be a slow process of discovery and adaptation. Terra Rosa is on my palette because I found it to be very useful in many circumstances, including the still life that I plan to do just after this video. Quick recap, I'll just go through from beginning to end. So we've got titanium white, Cad Lemon, Cad Yellow Pail, Indian Yellow, Raw Sienna, Cadmium Orange, Cadmium Scarlet, Alizarin Permanent or Permanent Alizarin Crimson, Burnt Sienna or Transparent Red Oxide, Ivory Black, Ultramarine Blue, Sap Green, Turquoise Blue, Dioxazine Violet, Raw Umber, Viridian, Pale Rose Blush, King's Blue, Naples Yellow, and Terra Rosa. Alright, well thanks for watching. I hope you learned something and I hope you try some of these colors out. I've really been enjoying listening and checking out your comments that you guys are making. If you have any questions about any of the colors that I have on my palette or one that I don't have on my palette, make sure to comment down below and let me know what those are. I will continually change and adapt my palette to different circumstances. Maybe there's a color that I really need and I don't have it somewhere on my palette. I may go searching for it in the art store, but some colors may be way too intense and I find that I'm never using them. So I have no problem removing them from my palette. So yeah, if you're curious as to why I use a particular pigment or where to find any pigments, we'll have that information down below. All right, so thank you. I'll see you next time.